Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, re-engross Senate Bill 2303 with House amendments, introduced by Senator Larsen and other House and Senate sponsors. Re-engross Senate Bill 2303 is a bill for an act to create and enact a new section to Chapter 12.1-17 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to the application of sections in Chapter 12.1-17 to certain procedures, to amend and reenact sections 12.1-01-04 and 12.1-16-06 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to the definition of human being and the applications of sections in Chapter 12.1-16 to certain medical procedures, to provide directives to the Department of Human Services regarding Medicaid and other coverage for pregnant women, and to provide an effective date. Mr. Speaker, this is a fiscal note prepared by the Department of Human Services on March 20th, 2013. Their analysis indicates that in the general fund for the 2013-2015 biennium, expenditures and appropriations of $7,326,000. In the other funds category, revenue, expenditures, and appropriations of $4,066,000. In the 2015-2017 biennium, general fund expenditures and appropriations of $10,519,000, and in the other funds category, revenue, expenditures, and appropriations of $5,804,000. Mr. Speaker, your Human Services Committee recommends amendments which are passed on the previous fixed order. When so amended, and engrossed recommends do not pass on Senate Bill 2303 with House amendments by a vote of 7 yeas, 6 nays, 0 absent, and 0 not voting. Mr. Speaker.
Representative Mock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Rule 319, I request to divide the question on Senate Bill 2303 into two divisions. Division A, sections 1, 2, 3, and 6, and comprising Division B would be sections 4 and 5.
In accordance with Rule 319, any member may have the question divided. Each division of a divided question requires the same vote for adoption that the division would require if it stood alone. After voting on all the divisions, the approved divisions comprise the question before the House. Representative Mock's request is granted. The House has before it Division A. Representative Weiss, would you explain Division A?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. One, I guess up front, I'd hope this Assembly would resist splitting these out in Division A and B, that we'd support both divisions, take the bill up as the way it came out of the committee, and have our discussion then. But Division A is basically sections 1, 2, 3, and 6 have to do with the personhood part of the bill. They define virtually the exact same language that we just passed in SCR 4009. Human being means an individual member of the species, Homo sapiens, at every stage of development. Sections 2 and 3 go into the defining what types of medical procedures are legal. It also defines what type of IVF procedures are legal. Section 6, which really would be a moot point if Division B does not pass, because Section 6 has to do with implementation dates. If for some reason Section 1 and 3 would be declared null and void or would be tied up in court, Sections 4 and 5 would not go into effect unless Sections 1 and 3 also go into effect. With that, Mr. Speaker, that explains Division A. Again, I would ask that this Assembly support both Division A and B. Let's have our discussion on the bill as a whole. Frankly, we don't need to discuss the same thing twice, so support Division A and Division B, and then let's go on and discuss the bill.
Is there any discussion on Division A? Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering if Representative Weiss would stand for a question.
Representative Weiss, would you respond to a question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Mooney.
Representative Weiss, it's a fairly simple question, and I know we did discuss a little bit of this in committee, but I'm wondering if you could share with the Assembly. Our Roe versus Wade has been in effect since 1973. We all know that. And my question would be, do we think that this will be upheld or be challenged specifically in the higher courts if it's made into law?
Representative Weiss.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Mooney, I assume you're directly referencing Sections 1 and Sections 3 of the bill. I can't speak to whether it would be challenged. I guess there would probably be likely to be challenged, but I obviously can't speak to who would possibly do that. Would it have upheld? I am not an attorney. I may have stayed at a Holiday Express, but I've slept with one. You know, the odds are, I don't know if it would stand up. And frankly, that's a decision that our Attorney General and the state will make if indeed we pass this division.
And if I may, Mr. Speaker,
You may continue.
one more question, Representative Weiss.
Representative Weiss, would you yield to a second question?
Mr. Speaker, yes, I will.
Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Weiss, the question would be then, why would we have not had a fiscal note attached with a potential legal matter?
Representative Weiss.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Mooney, there is a fiscal note on this bill, and if you look in the section on the fiscal note, it does point out that there could possibly be a legal challenge, and that indeed it could have a cost, but it's undetermined at this time for several reasons. One, we don't know that it'll be challenged, because anything we pass in this state, it's considered constitutional until somebody challenges it. So if it's not challenged, it's a moot point. If it is challenged, even in the fiscal note, as it points out, it's not clear what it would cost the state to have to defend it if that happens. So you'll notice that it basically says it's undetermined, but I think it said something about it could have a cost of up to $60,000 if I recall. Either that or I'm confusing it with the fiscal note on the other bill, but it's not able to be determined because we don't know. And if we don't know, then how do you put a fiscal note on it?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further discussion? Representative Kiefert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. I am standing in support of Senate Bill 2303. I'm on the Human Services Committee and voted for passage of this bill. Now, what this bill does in entirety is to establish ethical treatment for what has already been classified as a human being, the human embryo. Now, currently in North Dakota, we have no guidelines concerning the treatment of human embryos. This bill would not be in conflict with the in vitro fertilization process. It only addresses the treatment of the remaining embryos, the potential brothers and sisters of the successful embryo that was chosen to be granted life. Now, we have to stop and think that all of us were once embryos. And a red vote today will be to remain things as they are. That would be the doctors will have the right to dispose of all the unused human embryos in any manner as they wish, being the trash or the toilet. A green vote will only say, treat a human embryo as it should be treated, a human being. Thank you, and I hope you vote green.
Is there further discussion? I would remind members that we're discussing just Division A at this point. Is there further discussion? Representative Delmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the bill carrier yield to a question, please?
Representative Weiss, would you yield to a question?
Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Delmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill has a lot of personal concerns for me because when I was of childbearing age and went through pregnancies, I had 6 miscarriages. In this bill, it puts that type of circumstance into criminal code. All of us have people in our lives who have had miscarriages, have lost babies, and I think you know what that's like to go through. Why would we want to criminalize people and have police investigations brought into those very painful circumstances?
Representative Weiss.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Delmore, I guess I'm not completely sure where your question is. Is your question whether that does that criminalizes or why we would do that?
Representative Delmore.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just don't understand why all of this was put into the criminal code if there wasn't a reason for wanting people who've gone through enough tragic experiences without putting it through there, where I think, and police people have agreed with me, that it could be investigated by the police department.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Delmore, I guess I would point out on Section 2, subsection 3 of the bill, it does exempt the woman in this case from any of the criminal sanctions. It says, these sections apply only to the principal actor other than the pregnant woman with respect to criminal conduct upon a person who has not yet been born.
Well, Mr. Speaker and Representative Wise, I appreciate your information, but not all of those medical treatments are emergency, and they aren't always life-threatening, but they do have to be handled. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Representative Zeiser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the bill carrier yield to another question, please?
Representative Weiss, would you yield to another question?
Mr. Speaker, I will.
Representative Zeiser.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Weiss. Getting back to the constitutionality question, has not our Attorney General spoke in front of the Senate committee on the constitutionality of another bill this session, in fact?
Representative Weiss.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Zeiser, I guess I can't speak to whether the Attorney General did speak in front of the Senate or not.
Mr. Speaker, that's my understanding that the Attorney General did speak to the constitutionality of a bill. And so that is, he can do that and does do that. It's his choice as far as I understand.
I'm not sure if there was a question, but that's fine. Is there further discussion? Representative Ruby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. First, to address one of the questions, we have restrictions and penalties in our code all over other than just the criminal code. So this is not really groundbreaking to move this language here. We do have this language in some other areas of our code currently, but not necessarily in this area and in this way, especially with the language that's here. We had an interesting discussion in the previous bill about when does life begin, and there's varying ideas of when that is. I think we need to be very careful by saying when life is viable, when it's no longer dependent on the mother. I would contend to you that a baby just delivered is more dependent on the mother or some care at that point than the baby was before it was born, because there's not a lot of conscious needs immediately that the mother needs to do. Obviously, her body is life-sustaining at that point, but they're very helpless after they're born. They will die without care and with assistance very early, very easy. Also, do we decide that when they can breathe outside of the womb, then they're human? Well, we have senior citizens in nursing homes that can't breathe without assistance currently right now. Have they lost their, be called humans because they're in that situation? I don't think so. We also see where he needs some medical procedures for born. They're able to open the womb, bring the baby out, do the surgery, put it back in the womb for continuing on through its development until it's time to be born. Was it not a human at the time it was removed? Is it now a human because it's out of the womb? And then does it lose its ability to be a person or human after it's been placed back in? I mean, these are a lot of interesting questions that, obviously we think about when we talk about when life begins. I think scientifically that Representative Casper did a good job in the last bill talking about when life begins. Scientifically, DNA for that person that is different than the mother who is carrying it. And that's very important. Earlier, probably a week and a half ago, we had a bill that defined what is called a plant. Do you remember? A seed, a pip, which we found out was like an apple or an orange seed, and a bud. We're all listed on there. We know what a plant is. We know when a plant becomes a plant, when it's a seed. So do we not consider an embryo also to be a human? How inconsistent is that? The first section of this bill probably looks very familiar to many of you who were here last session and the session before. This is language that we have passed overwhelmingly by, I think last session, 2/3 majority. It just defines when human life begins. Section 2 and 3 are language that was put on by the Senate last session. This language was put on primarily at the request of the opposition, of the people who said this would hinder their ability to provide medical care, their ability to perform in vitro fertilization. The language here clearly protects the in vitro fertilization. I know many of you received a letter on your desks probably yesterday from, I think there's like 7 doctors and Chris Dodson from the Catholic Conference said the language is very clear that within regards to embryos, Senate Bill 2303 would only prohibit the non-accidental destruction of healthy human embryos, and as such is no different than what has been in law in Louisiana for decades. It is not enough to claim that a law is unclear in its language, and this is in reference to the North Dakota Medical Association, and it says they should demonstrate with specificity what, other than the non-accidental destruction of healthy human embryos, is prohibited by this bill. The opponents have repeatedly said this will end IVF, or in vitro fertilization. They have been asked, what do you perform right now that is not contained in this that you wish to do? They have not been able to tell us one thing. I've referenced Louisiana. State of Arizona also has some restrictions on destruction of embryos. Louisiana has a very strict restriction, and it's been in existence for some time. It's been in since 1986. The Louisiana legislature enacted, I won't go through the numbers of their bills, but the law stated that an in vitro fertilized human ovum is a biological human being, and that an in vitro fertilized human ovum exists as a judicial person. And now, as I understand in Louisiana, they've had in vitro fertilization since 1986. It's done quite often, I understand. Matter of fact, as I understand, it is less expensive to have in vitro fertilization done in Louisiana than it is in Georgia. The bill also protects for medical treatment and complications. This is language, again, that was not in the bill that we passed out last session, but was put in at the request of the medical people that were here. Matter of fact, one of them, and they admit it, actually sat at the table in the conference committee directing how some of the language was going to be adopted. Now, certainly they couldn't write it, and they didn't support it after. I'll give you that. But they were at the table. They were involved in the process. And at the point that there was an underhanded procedure that laid this bill on the table did not have to do with this part of the bill. It had to do with a different issue. So I would hope that we take this time, again, to reaffirm that we believe that life begins at conception. All of the pro-life groups are in support of this, and that unity is important. I appreciate their support, and I ask that this body, again, support this portion of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further discussion on Division A? Representative Anderson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I plan not to support this bill, and I got several reasons, but the first one deals with, we had a number of physicians that come through going to medical school. They also signed a letter stating that if this bill is passed, they would be less likely to practice in North Dakota. As a rural resident and on a hospital board in my local area, we need physicians, and anything that would discourage physicians from practicing in North Dakota, I'm not going to support. The second issue has to do with family here. Every morning I come to work here, people have a picture on their desk of their family, have a picture of their family on their screensavers, and through the IVF process here, there's a lot of people that have had kids and grandkids. And I feel that if we pass this law, it's going to make it more difficult, more expensive for some people to have kids in their lives. And basically, my life, and I think a lot of your lives, revolve around your kids and your grandkids. And I do not want to pass a piece of legislation that can prohibit this from happening to anyone. Thanks.
Representative Moucher.
Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, I would like to echo some of the things that Representative Anderson said. This bill is very personal for me. I am the grandmother of 15 grandchildren. 5 of those are here because of IVF. My son and his wife still have 2 embryos in Fargo, and they do plan to give them up for adoption. So not just are we benefiting, obviously, from this procedure, but they're trusting that another family will also. And I know that many people are saying that this will be fine. This isn't going to stop anything in Fargo. I really question whether all of us are knowledgeable enough to make that call. I do not ever pretend to know more than any doctor who has spent years studying these procedures. And I would really beg to differ that any of us could give a knowledgeable, justifiable decision. And I'm sure that many of you also have had numerous people write to you and say, please, I would not have my child if it weren't for this. Do not risk taking this away from other families. And I have a really hard time voting no on some of these bills. I don't know how much everyone watches everyone's record, but I campaigned that I was very pro-life. I do not support abortions simply for elective reasons. So I have really struggled this week. But yet, as my pastor prayed today, that people would vote for their convictions. Wow, it really hit home. But that's what I've been doing. So I've had some no votes. But I can live with myself, and I can go home to my district and say, I was on those committees, and I heard the pros, I heard the cons. These are not easy decisions for any of us to make. But I can live with my convictions. Whether people choose to vote for me again if I would choose to run, that's certainly their prerogative, and it's one of the blessings that we have in this country of democracy. But I would just ask that you be very, very careful and consider this bill. Thank you.
Is there further discussion? Representative Ruby, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't mean to delay this longer than we have to, but again, I just, I have no intention, or never did I with the previous bills that I've sponsored, intend to put an end to in vitro fertilization. It's a technology that is, as we've heard earlier, results in wonderful, wonderful children and grandchildren. And as a grandfather myself, I understand the joys and that the loyalties to that. But again, we didn't hear in those two responses one specific way that this will prevent in vitro fertilization. Do you know that the best estimate right now is that there's 600,000 embryos currently being frozen right now? Of those, statistically, we expect 100,000 live births, about 1 in 6. So obviously, we certainly are not looking at making it easy to destroy these. There's provisions that if it's not developing, there's no problems with destroying the embryos. Once they're implanted, that falls under the abortion protections. So this doesn't prevent the selection, adverse selection. I understand that's not being done in the state anyway. I just think that we need to just really look at what we are saying of when we believe life begins, and at some point when we're going to protect that life. And this does not, and it has been specifically drafted to protect for the concerns that we just heard. So I really would appreciate, I know many of you voted for this before, I would ask for you to vote for it again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Fair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Assembly, I'm urging a no vote on this. Let me share with you, speaking of the IVF physicians, this is what because I was in committee and had questioned why are they so concerned. I can see the exemptions that were described. They seem to be to exempt things. So this is the information that they provided, or one of the physicians, one of the IVF physicians provided to me directly. Number one, and there's about 5 items here. Number one, as physicians, we are ethically bound to treat complications of pregnancy before they become life-threatening. If we don't treat a complication of pregnancy before it becomes life-threatening, we are breaking our own sworn oaths as physicians. But if we do, we can be prosecuted. Her second comment was the statement medical testing analysis, which is not defined but implies invasive testing which is not routinely performed on embryos. Her third comment was the term would not produce a live birth is something that she says can't be determined. The fourth comment had to do with the bill putting in code that these are crimes defining murder, homicide, negligent manslaughter, and so on. And her fifth comment was the bills being, quote, too confusing and contradictory with the stakes too high, such as loss of license and felony charges. Further goes on to draw a line in the sand, if you will, basically saying that if this bill goes into law, that they will cease operations in North Dakota. Now, Mr. Speaker and members, I'm not saying that what she says is correct. I understand that there are physicians, the North Dakota Medical Association came out against this. I know there are physicians and attorneys who have said it's not a problem, that it won't affect the IVF clinics, but there certainly is some controversy about it. And anytime there is controversy and conflicting things, it raises the whole issue in terms of unintended consequences. And rather than raise that issue, a better thing to do would be to hear a bill that is specifically an IVF bill, hear the pros and cons, and vote on an IVF bill as opposed to this bill. So I would urge a red vote on this portion of this bill. Thank you.
There further discussion, Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. I just want to remind the Assembly, if we kill this part of the bill, we're left with Medicaid expansion. So I do hope that we support this part of the bill and vote green. Thank you.
Representative Kiefert, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I just wanted to address one area. I stated earlier that we're trying to establish some guidelines for protection for the embryos. Now, when the comment was made that you were going to give eggs up for adoption, we're trying to protect those eggs, because right now you're opening them up to the world. You've got no guarantee what's going to happen to them, where they're going to end up. So we're trying to provide protection for those embryos. And I just learned yesterday that when they have a dish full of embryos that are fertilized, they can spin the dish. And the female embryos will go to the outside of the dish, and the lighter ones will remain in the center, that are the males. So right at that point, if you want a boy or a girl, you can sort all those out and toss them at that point. So we need to realize that we're trying to establish what we don't have in North Dakota is some guidelines to protect these embryos that are classified as human beings. Thank you.
Representative Carlson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I've sat in this chamber for 20 years, and this is an old friend. We've debated this issue for years, and we have various names for it. You're either pro-abortion or you're anti-abortion. I prefer the other side of the issue. You're either pro-life or you're anti-life. And I stand here today to speak for my son. It's hard to speak, but I'm going to speak anyway. He was born to a 16-year-old female, young North Dakota lady from Dickinson and a 19-year-old father. His mother at that point in time, in 1975, could have had him aborted. Thank God he did. They didn't. It wasn't many years later, we go through all the things parents go through and raise them, and he wanted to know who his mom was, and then he decided, no, you're really my family. So he grows up and gets married, and his three little kids sat here with me on the floor not too long ago. And if his 4-year-old daughter was here today, she'd stand up and say, thank you, Grandma, for not aborting me. So you tell me the consequences of this. We talk about picking and choosing and talking about the Petri dish and in vitro fertilization, all great things. But what about those that never had a chance to be my grandkids? They didn't have a voice in this. If he was gone, there were no grandkids. Those 3 kids wouldn't go on. A kindergarten class a week is gone. Now, your vote on the floor is your choice in this issue. And that's between you and your conscience and your God. However it goes, it goes. But I know where I'm going to sit. I'm going to defend the life of North Dakotans. And if you choose not to, that's fine. But this should not be politicized. It's been politicized to the point where you try and do it for political gain to win in the next election. Shame on us if that's the case. Pick your side, stay to your side, and either you're for life or you're against it. But don't politicize it. Don't have pre-canned speeches and pre-assign people to speak. Speak from your heart. Speak on where you want to be on the issue, and then stay there. But let me tell you, there's consequences to the Petri dish, and there's consequences to my son who would have never been born, and grandkids that I'd have never had. And I will always vote for life.
Is there further discussion? Representative Mooney, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in response to that, I would like to say that I vote for families in North Dakota, the rights for women and families and doctors to be able to make their choices based on health care decisions that should be left to them, and not with the Legislative Assembly putting their nose into it. I stand by my convictions, and I will uphold my convictions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration, Division A of Senate Bill 2303. If you vote green on Division A, it will remain in the bill. If you vote red, it will be removed from the bill. A recorded roll call vote is required for each division. And on the final bill, the question is on adoption of Division A. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? The key will be closed. The clerk will take the record. The final vote on Division A shows 59 yea, 33 nay, 2 absent, not voting. Division A of Senate Bill 2303 has been approved. The House has before it Division B of Senate Bill 2303. Representative Weiss will explain Division B.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. Division B is sections 4 and 5 of the bill and also tied into section 6 of the bill, which we just passed in Division A. What this section does is basically says that the state of North Dakota will cover every woman's insurance coverage that's pregnant. There's two sections. The first section says that the department will attempt to get the highest amount of Medicaid reimbursement possible so that we'd get a 50-50 share. And the testimony we had in committee was they were hoping to get at 200% of poverty. Section 5 says that any of those that are not covered under the Medicaid waiver would then be covered by the state with the same coverage that we currently have under Medicaid. Your committee did add a couple amendments that basically said, and that's what section 6 is, that said this will apply only if the rest of the bill goes into effect. And it also allows the department to set a crowd-out provision, which would basically say that if you currently have coverage, you wouldn't be able to drop your coverage today and go on to the state tomorrow to be covered through your pregnancy, that they could put basically what we call a crowd-out. In other words, you'd have to be uninsured for a certain period of time before you would be able to be covered. It has a fiscal note. I think it was revised with our amendments. I believe the fiscal note's roughly a little over $11 million. 5.7, I believe, of that is to cover. For the state's portion, a little over $4 million would be the Fed's portion. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, as I said earlier, your committee looked at this bill as a whole. Our discussion, our votes in committee were based on the bill as a whole. I would ask that we do adopt Division B, and then we take up the bill as a whole and have our discussion as we did in committee. So please support Division B. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any discussion on Division B? Representative Holman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting that after being here my third session, I find that I have something very much in common with Representative Carlson. I have a daughter who came from a very similar situation. Because the mother of that child had good health care, she was able to carry that child to term, and I became the adopted parent of that child. This section of the bill is about life. It's about the life of the mother and the life of the unborn child. One of the most effective ways of ensuring the birth of a healthy child is to provide quality health care to expectant mothers, helping them to maintain a healthy lifestyle and a healthy body during that pregnancy. It's been proven that women of childbearing age who have access to quality health care are more likely to carry babies to term and have healthy babies. By voting in favor of this Section B, the Medicaid coverage for pregnant women, you're going to be voting for health care, something we all want for pregnant women, and ultimately for the life of the child they carry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion on Division B? Seeing none, the clerk will open the key for Division B. Has every member voted? Does any member wish? Representative Carlson? Votes aye. Koppelman votes. Kay Koppelman votes aye. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? The key will be closed. The clerk will take the record. Division B is 90 yea, 2 nay, 2 absent, not voting. Division B is declared passed. The House will be on the 14th order of business, and the House has before it Senate Bill 2303 in its entirety, because both divisions remained in the bill. So, Representative Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly. I realize we've already had half of the debate on this bill. Your committee, by a 7-0 vote, did pass it out as a do not pass. Didn't I say that? Oh, 7. I apologize. 7-6. It's already been a long afternoon. I'm not going to stand up here and tell anyone how to vote or tell you to follow necessarily the recommendation of the committee. I am going to explain the points of the bill. I will explain some of the rationale that the committee used when it made its decision. Your committee, I think, did a tremendous amount of work on all these issues. We had several hours of hearings and discussion. So I think it's important that this assembly know what's in the bill and at least know some of the reasons for the committee and what it did. As already been covered, Section 1, we're defining a human being, and I've already explained that. In Section 2, and obviously there's been some debate already, in Section 2, subsection 2, and A through E, basically describes exceptions to the homicide code. In other words, medical treatment for life-threatening conditions are exempt. Medical treatment for life-threatening conditions of pregnancy are exempt. The screening, collecting, preparing, etc. for in vitro is exempt. The disposal or destruction of a fertilized embryo is exempt if it's by determination of a medical professional, it would not have produced a live birth. The disposal or destruction of a fertilized embryo created through in vitro, which has not progressed in development for 36 hours, is exempt. And contraception administered before a clinically diagnosable pregnancy is exempt. That's what's in Section 2, and that's also in the homicide code. Further in Section 3 gets into the section of code dealing with abortion, and basically it's the exact same language. Section 4 and 5, we just had a discussion on Division B. It does provide coverage. So if this language in Sections 1 and 3 go into effect, every woman who is pregnant will receive coverage, whether it's through Medicaid or through the state. That's in Sections 4 and 5. Section 6 does the effective date. It gives the department 6 months basically to get things going, to make sure they're up and running on the system. So, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, that's what the bill does. Your committee took a long, hard look at this bill. And frankly, there were some issues, there were some questions that came up. One of the questions, or one of the, I think, things that the committee looked at was the fact that this assembly and our committee passed SCR 4009. 4009 will go to the people, and they will decide if they want that definition of a human being to be in our Constitution. So on the one hand, we're asking the people to decide if that's what they want. 2303 already says we're going to do it, and that's what the definition is. So some thought maybe we should let the people speak. There were questions. There's no debate that this bill prevents IVF. That's not in the bill. Will it limit it? Does it cause some issues? Some had some problems. Some had some questions that they didn't feel they had proper answers to. In the section on life-saving medical, there were some questions that some had. And so that's the reason why you saw, I think, a very divided vote in your Human Service Committee. Now, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of this Assembly, We have just passed 5 pieces of legislation. I would say landmark legislation in the state of North Dakota. No other state in this nation has made a statement like we have today. I would hope that we are prepared also to defend that statement that we've made, because it's important if we are going to do this, and we have, assuming the governor signs these, North Dakota needs to be prepared to defend our statement on what we believe on abortion. I would also ask that regardless of the outcome of this bill and the votes that we have already taken today, that we respect each and every vote that our colleagues made. I realize we all have strong convictions and passions on this issue. Both sides of the aisle. Both sides. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not urban or rural. These are personal issues to us and personal decisions. So I think we need to remember we have to respect that. I would hope that the people back home watching us respect the hard decision that we're making today. I don't think anyone in this chamber is taking this vote lightly. It's an important vote. These are tough issues. Every one of us, I think, has given a lot of thought. So I'm not here to change your mind, tell you how to vote. I just ask that however we vote, however this bill comes out, we know how the other ones have passed. We do need to respect our colleagues. We need to realize that we each made a very personal choice in how we voted. With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any discussion? Representative Ruby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I would hope that we could overturn the recommendation that came out of the committee, and I understand there were a lot of things they were looking at, and I think they put amendment on to sort of address one of the issues that was put on in the Senate. So I understand what they did. I didn't quite understand how then it came out with the vote it did. I remember in the first half we had 2 bills that went out. They were both dealing with abortion, and there was some discussion about them. One of them dealt with gender selection, abortions for that reason, and one for abnormalities. And I was sitting here thinking, how can anybody justify aborting for gender or for abnormalities, especially like Down syndrome, that is not a life debilitating condition. Not saying in some cases, in severe cases, there aren't a lot of issues. Don't get me wrong there. What I'm saying is, I was thinking, how can they defend that? And then it did hit me. It said, you know what? The people on that side of the issue are being consistent. They were being consistent to their convictions that there is no reason that you can't prohibit a woman to choose to have an abortion, whether it's healthy, whether it has abnormalities, whether for any reason, no reason at all even. So I thought, if I can respect that they're being consistent in their views, then I would hope that they would have the same respect for the fact that I'm consistent in my views, that life begins at conception. And it's not just my view, it is scientifically proven, in my opinion, and an opinion of many people across this country. We initially passed both of the divisions on this bill fairly strongly. None of putting those 2 divisions together does not make the bill worse. In some cases, depending on your views, should make it better. We're taking care of pregnant women. We've had a lot of debate in the past about prenatal care and those types of things, so I don't think we need to worry about that. If, as I said before, if we can determine that a seed is a definition of a plant, then we can certainly decide that an embryo is a human. I would hope that we could pass this bill in its entirety and again, reaffirm what we did last session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration. Oh, excuse me, Senator N. Johnson. I didn't see your light, Representative Johnson. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was a little late in getting up on it. Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly, Senate Bill 2303, by defining a person as a human being at every stage of development and putting that definition into our criminal code, this could apply to people who are at the end of their life as well as the beginning. I am concerned about the impact this will have on end-of-life decisions. As many of you know, I lost a son to cancer. We reached a point where with the doctor and nurses we had to make some very heart-wrenching decisions to not continue any life-prolonging supports. The bill says it does not preclude the withholding or withdrawal of life-prolonging treatment pursuant to state or federal law. However, several physicians and citizens testified or have sent emails saying that they are extremely confused and concerned that the language of this bill will be confusing to healthcare providers who are helping patients and his or her families make these critical end-of-life healthcare decisions. Healthcare providers may be confused about what procedures are allowable and fearful that they'll face jail time if they misinterpret the law while helping people at the end of their lives. Please support the committee's recommendation and vote no on Senate Bill 2303 and leave these extremely difficult private medical decisions to families and their doctors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration Senate Bill 2303. The clerk will open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed and the clerk will take the record. The final vote shows 43 yea, 49 nay, 2 absent, not voting. Senate Bill 2303 is declared failed. Continuing on the 14th order of business, the House has before
Mr.
it.
Speaker.
Representative Bigasok.
Mr. Speaker, may we be on the 8th order, please?
We are on the 8th order.